Hi. So I'm Jenny Goodman, and I'm a medic. I'm a kind of rebel medic. I'm not your standard medic. And I have to start with a confession. I know very little about fashion. I mean, I don't know anything about fashion. So what I'm doing here is applying what I know about environmental toxins to the area of clothing. And this is very new for me. So a lot of what you'll be learning here, I've only learnt myself very recently. Let me start with a little background introduction to who I am, so it might make a bit more sense why I'm here. Okay, so I qualified 40 years ago, got deeply disillusioned with orthodox medicine, really failing to make people significantly better and sometimes making them worse, and not asking my key question, which is, what are the root causes of illness? Why are people getting ill in the first place? Fast forward, I discovered a group of doctors who'd been asking the same questions I'd always been asking, like how can we do preventive medicine and what are the causes of illness? And they were finding answers which I hadn't found. So I joined, in the late 90s, the British Society for Ecological Medicine. And I'm going to try and explain roughly what that is. It's ecological medicine. It's ecological in two senses. One is it sees the whole body as one joined up ecosystem. And secondly, it sees the person within the wider ecosystem of our planet. Let me give you an example of the first one. You know, you go to your GP and you say, I've got this awful rash on my skin and my joints are really aching and I'm getting out of breath. So they refer you to a dermatologist, a rheumatologist and a chest physician. And those three people will never speak to each other. They're not asking what's going wrong in this person's body that's manifesting in these three different systems. Okay, next please. So what we do in practice in ecological medicine is nutrition and environmental medicine. Nutritional medicine means looking at food and diet, what's missing, why it's missing, and putting the good stuff back in, both through adjusting the diet and through supplementation if necessary. And with supplements, as with food, as with clothes, you have to check it's really full of the good stuff, not full of junk. And environmental medicine, which people know less about, is identifying the toxins in people's systems and taking them out by detoxification and also by education so people don't retox themselves, so they know where the junk is coming from. Usually we're talking about food, nutrition, and detox, but until recently I've just been thinking about pollutants that enter the body via the lungs, by breathing in, and via the gut, by what we eat, what we drink, and also by the skin, but I've just been thinking about moisturisers and cosmetics and stuff like that. The skin is the largest organ in the body, and it absorbs toxic chemicals from whatever you put on it, perfumes, deodorants, all that stuff. But, and this is where we're tying in with sustainable fashion, from your clothing and crucially from your bed linen as well. Okay, now the chemicals we're talking about are what's called lipophilic or fat soluble. They're all derived from petroleum and they dissolve in fat. And that means they get straight through your skin, and once inside your body, they get through your cell membranes because all the cell membranes are made of fats. Good fats, fats that need to be in there. But petrochemicals like those in synthetic fabrics or like pesticides will go straight through. So they get into every organ of the body, but in particular they are attracted to fatty tissue, and that includes the brain. The brain is an organ with a really high percentage of fat. So your mental as well as your physical health is affected by absorbing these chemicals through your skin. And all sorts of diseases have been linked to our contact with petrochemicals. So cancers of all sorts, which are increasing vastly. If I ask a room full of, well, let me ask you, do any of you know anybody with cancer? Have anybody ever known anyone with cancer? Okay, so that's virtually every hand in the room. If I'd asked that question 100 years ago, no hands would have gone up. 50 years ago, maybe 3 or 4. So it is a pandemic, it is becoming normalised, and our response is, to run marathons and raise money, rather than to look at the root causes. Petrochemicals are one of the root causes, and clothing is one of the ways they get into you. Similarly, messing up your hormones, so everything to do with endocrine disruption, in particular thyroid disease, which is another epidemic. Reproductive problems, and that can include infertility, subfertility, miscarriage, babies born with defects, and menstrual cycle problems, menopausal problems. All of that can be linked with these chemicals. And most of all, neurological problems. The pesticides that we'll be looking at in a minute were originally derived from nerve gases. Okay. So let's start with king cotton, the most important fabric. Let's look at the next slide, please. Yeah. Okay, so cotton's natural because it grows, but, here's the big but, at least 99% of the cotton currently grown is grown using huge amounts of biocides. Biocides is the collective term for fungicides, herbicides or weed killers, insecticides and pesticides. They're all originally derived from nerve gases. They kill living things, and that's why they predominantly damage the nervous system, but they're also implicated in all sorts of other diseases. Okay, they damage every living creature, plant and animal that comes in contact with them, and that includes, initially, all the creatures that live in the soil, in the earth, that are vital for the soil's fertility and therefore for our survival, from earthworms to friendly mycorrhizal fungi to bacteria that live in the soil. They damage all the people involved in cotton production, and that starts with actually the people who manufacture the pesticides, then the people who have to spray them, who often don't wear proper protective clothing in so-called third world countries, the people who are picking the cotton that's been sprayed, the people who are packing it, handling it, all the way along the supply chain, and you, us, when we wear the clothes made from this polluted cotton, and finally when they get thrown away again, eventually, however often they're recycled, they end up in landfill, they're polluting the earth again. And they kill birds, they kill fish, they're not nice substances at all, and we fed ourselves on this planet for millions of years without them. So Pesticide Action Network, which is an amazing organisation, commissioned a study, so not a direct study, but a review of all the existing studies, and they found there were only 35 studies actually looking directly at the health effect of the pesticides used specifically on cotton. And their findings are immense and important, and it's a 2018 study, worth going and looking it up. I've just picked out a couple of key facts. 500 people a day, at least, nearly. Okay, we can't be precise. But these are the people who are known to be dying of acute pesticide poisoning. I suspect it's an underestimate, because not everyone who dies of pesticide poisoning gets the diagnosis. And more of us, not only in Africa and India, but all over the Western world, are suffering these chronic long-term illnesses, brain damage, cancer, reproductive problems, and so on, as a result. Now, I'm not saying it's all about clothing. I'm just saying this is one huge contributory factor that has been neglected. Medicine doesn't think about it. And in the same way as the previous speakers were saying, that something like 25% of carbon emissions and global warming is down to the fashion industry, it may well be that 20% of all chronic illness is down to it as well. Okay. So cotton farmers are obviously the worst affected, especially their children. And the incidence of behavioural disturbances, lowered IQ, all sorts of mental and developmental abnormalities among their children is huge. I mean, it's like over 50% of the cotton farmers' children. And I was really shocked by this next bit. I'm sorry, this isn't a glossy presentation. I've no idea how to do multicoloured photos and, glitzy presentations. It's just black print on white. Sorry about that. 60% of their income, these impoverished farmers in Africa, are spending on pesticides. And the pesticide manufacturers are laughing all the way to the bank. It's absolutely horrendous. And of course, the health consequences are not paid for by the manufacturers who've caused it. They're paid for, insofar as they're paid for at all, by the impoverished economies in Africa and India, which haven't got very well functioning health systems at all. And the UN says that $4.4 billion worth of healthcare costs in sub-Saharan Africa directly related to pesticide use. Interestingly, we haven't got equivalent figures for the Western world, but I think that would be significant as well. But all of the patients I have had, and there have been many, who've been suffering from pesticide poisoning, you can't identify whether it's from their clothes or eating non-organic food or occupation exposure. It's very hard to identify it, but we can measure, and I do measure pesticides in the system. None of them have had a diagnosis of pesticide poisoning from anywhere in the conventional medicine world. You know, they're told they've got cancer, or they've got chronic fatigue, or they've got multiple sclerosis, or they've got Alzheimer's. They have. Those diagnoses are correct. But the root cause is often pesticide poisoning along with other factors, and it's not acknowledged. The reasons it's more acknowledged in the third world, so-called, is because they get acute poisoning, right? They get literally carrying their water in an old pesticide can, that sort of thing, and the kid drinks from it and gets ill immediately. What we're seeing is subtler and harder to diagnose, but just as real. The chronic, long-term effects of the drip, drip, drip of exposure to tiny amounts on a daily basis. And the thing is, it's not news that these substances are hazardous. The World Health Organization has listed many of them as carcinogens for many years. But it's still perfectly legal for the manufacturers to produce them and these poor farmers to use them and then us to wear the clothes. Okay, so I've said this. We have pandemics of cancer, of autoimmunity, of neurodegenerative disease among people of all ages, including children. And toxic clothes are one of the contributing factors. Okay, so here's some good news. Although it's just under 1% of all the cotton produced in the world, that's enough, actually. And if we just buy the organic cotton and stop buying the contaminated cotton, there will be more and more organic cotton produced and less of the conventional cotton produced. And that's probably the single most important take-home message. Right? You can buy organic cotton clothes, you can buy organic cotton bedding, but make sure that it doesn't just say made with organic cotton. The with is a way of cheating, meaning it has been made with some, maybe 5%, 10% organic cotton. It has to be made of 100% organic cotton. Okay, next please. I feel like Chris Whitty, next slide please. Now, as well as cotton, of course, we now have vast amounts of synthetic fibres. They don't originally come from plants, they're made in the laboratory, in the factory. Nylon, polyester, acrylic, petrochemical. And they were, of course, greeted with great joy when they were first manufactured, because they're more convenient and they don't crease and they dry more quickly and blah, blah. However, when they're washed, they shed plastic microfibres, microplastics which end up in the ocean, and they end up in us as well. 4 grams of plastic a day we're all eating because the Earth is one ecosystem and we are connected with it, and what goes around comes around. And plastic is implicated in breast cancer, and it's implicated in all sorts of reproductive and endocrine disorders. They end up in the ocean and they do not break down. Producing them generates a huge amount of greenhouse gases, so they're contributing to climate change. And because they're not breathable, they're very, very irritant for some people's skin. They stop your sweat evaporating, which is a problem. Okay, now, interestingly, natural fibres like cotton and wool are fire resistant by nature. You don't have to add anything to them to make them. So we, mammals and birds, are actually fire resistant. But synthetics are not, they're a fire hazard. So by law in the UK, you have to put flame retardants in them. Now, there used to be PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, and eventually there was an outcry because they were found to be incredibly toxic. So the manufacturer said, oh, it's all right, we've made new ones that are safer, polybrominated biphenyls. They are just as toxic, and this happens again and again. Note the bromine in the middle of that word. Polybrominated means there's lots of bromine. Bromine is a toxic halogen. It pushes out iodine, which is crucial for the health of the breast, the prostate, the thyroid, the ovary, and other organs. And of course, these flame retardants are in your soft furnishings as well, if you don't get either organic or second-hand. These fabrics are often impregnated with formaldehyde as well, which is definitely a carcinogen. And why do they put all this junk in our clothes? And this is a really important question. It's profitable for them. Right? Their priorities are what they think people want. They decide what we want and then say that the public demands it, by the way. So we, the public, have to just demand different things. It's got to be stain resistant, water resistant, odour resistant, wrinkle resistant. That's profitable, but it's only profitable because their advertising has convinced us that that's what we need. Right? Making the clothes safe isn't their priority, but it has to be ours. Okay, and then there's these kind of in-between ones, and some of them are here, and I think the jury's out. Rayon and bamboo fabrics, they certainly start off natural, made from plants, but sometimes to make them into functional clothing, you have to treat them with toxic chemicals. I think the jury is out on all these. Then there's Tencel. There's some Tencel here at the stalls. It's made from eucalyptus, and that's fine. Eucalyptus is a plant, it's a tree. But sometimes they blend it with toxic chemicals, and sometimes they don't. So if you're going for semi-synthetics like Tencel, please ask penetrating questions. Okay, next. Now there's been a lot in the media about these recently. PFAs or PFOAs, the perfluoroalkyl substances. The key thing about their chemical structure is that where you would have a hydrogen bonded to a carbon, you've got fluorine bonded to a carbon. It's a chemical bond that's almost impossible to break. They don't break down, and I read recently an article saying, breakthrough, we found a way of breaking them down with a substance called DMSO, and it leaves you with just carbon and fluoride. And fluoride, they say, is safe. No, it isn't. Fluoride is not remotely safe. So the only thing is to not produce them in the first place. If you haven't seen it yet, do watch the film Dark Waters. It's a 2019 film, I think, quite recent, about what happens to the people on whose farms the waste product from making these things is dumped. The company is DuPont, and it fought very, very hard to not be responsible legally for the huge amount of cancer and birth deformities that was caused in the area of West Virginia where they were dumping their chemicals. But even if you don't live on a farm where they've quietly dumped their waste products, if you're cooking in a non-stick pan, that's got the PFAs. And I discovered to my horror, having just bought a nice new waterproof, a lot of the water-resistant stuff and stain-resistant stuff is made using these chemicals. How do we keep dry? Wear an umbrella? Carry an umbrella? Okay, so they're not just in non-stick stuff, they're not just in waterproof clothing, they're in carpets. Very hard to get safe carpet, but you can get second-hand carpet, and you can go into a big carpet warehouse and say, I want this piece of carpet that's been in your warehouse for a year, because it's been outgassing a lot of its chemicals. There's not as much there, so it's a bit safer for you. And also, you get your carpets, curtains, sofas and so on in spring, in April, May. That means for the next 6 months you can have the windows open without freezing to death, and anything that's outgassed will go out the window. Okay, food packaging. You know, I've just got this fantasy that we'll buy all this packaged food from the supermarket, we'll get the food out of it, leave it in our fridges, and we'll take the packaging back. And we'll have a mass trespass into the supermarket and leave all that toxic plastic packaging, which is responsible for a huge amount of climate change, on the floor of the supermarket. They would soon stop doing it and go back how we used to buy our food, which was loose, with paper bags to put it in, and you bring your own bag. Okay, and cosmetics. I mean, cosmetics, the conventional ones, are full of these horrible chemicals, but every decent health food shop has got safe, natural alternatives. Look up Green People, look up Big Green Smile, there's all sorts of ways of getting safe cosmetics. But when I say health food shop, I don't mean a chain that only sells its own brands. I mean a serious one where the people know what they're talking about, and they have a variety, and they don't look at you askance if you're reading labels with a magnifying glass, which you should always be doing. Okay, so these PFAs are linked with that horrible long list of diseases and more. And it doesn't have to be on the label. That's another thing I've been disconcerted to discover. As with perfumes, you know, you can buy something that says it's green because it's got like a herb in it or natural lavender in it or 1% of something organic. You have to look beyond the label. It's hard work. We have to do the research. Okay, other toxins, I'm afraid I have to say, particularly those imported from China, not just clothes, toys, children's toys, the kind that they suck, and bags have been found to contain lead, which is a very well-known neurotoxic, damages the brain, the gut, and other parts of the body. Phthalates, which nobody can pronounce, PHTH, phthalates are plasticizers. They are what make plastics soft, right? So there's very little of them in a hard Tupperware lunchbox, but there's a huge amount in something like cling film, plastic wrap. The softer the plastic, the more it leaks into anything it touches. And they've been very definitely linked with breast cancer. Okay. So, as I've said, but it's worth saying again, whenever manufacturers are finally forced to withdraw a toxic chemical product, they come back a few months or a year or two later and they say, it's okay, we made a safer version of it now. They've changed one atom in the molecule as they replaced chlorine by bromine, which is almost identical in its effect, changing PCBs to PBBs. It's never true. It's always similar and it always has the same health effects, but you've got another 20-year legal process before you can get that one banned. And they're just, as I say, laughing all the way to the bank. Okay, this is what keeps happening. Right, not only that, clothing, menstrual pads, tampons, and children's nappies, 90% plastic. Is there a stall here, Amelia, selling reusable nappies, reusable pads? Not this year. Okay, next year, because there are plenty of alternatives safe for the babies, for women, and the planet, because these things are put back in landfill, and again you get the microfibers of plastic going into the earth, into the water table, and eventually into the sea. Okay, here's the good news. This is what we can wear very safely, doing no harm to ourselves or the planet. Organic cotton, hemp, which grows, and it grows in this country, linen, which grows, and it grows in this country, and wool. Now, not just any old wool, because unfortunately, if the sheep are not organic, they have been dipped, and they have been dipped in toxic insecticides, which are organophosphates, and these are absolutely neurotoxic and carcinogenic. So you want organic sheep that haven't been dipped, or any other animal that's got a fleece we can wear, you know, goats, camels, yaks, South American animals, so long as it's organic. All of that is safe to wear, and it's safe to use as bed linen. Okay, so positive news, the July to September issue, which is very cheerful to read because it tells you not the bad news but all the good stuff that's been done. And they shared information about 6 new materials that are supposed to be safe and sustainable. I expect some of them are more safe and sustainable than synthetics without a shadow of a doubt. But I think it's a bit early, that's why I've called them newer candidates. More research is needed. I think the jury's out. But Swift Foam, they make trainers that are not synthetic, and they're meant to be much more sustainable. Similar Pangaea are using seaweed and eucalyptus to make lyocell. Now, seaweed is a brilliant source because ordinary cotton, even organic, uses a huge amount of water, and seaweed doesn't use any water because it's already just growing in the sea. They harvest it on a sustainable 4-year cycle. So that's a good one, I think. Bolt Threads is making vegan leather. They call it Unleather, which is great. Kintra, this is a biodegradable version of polyester. They say it's 95% biodegradable. That has to be an improvement. Now, we want this circular economy, don't we? We don't really want to just buy recycling plastics and junk. We don't want to just delay it going to landfill. We want it never to go to landfill. So I think Sympatex is a sort of circular economy. So you've got plastic bottles turning into anoraks. When they're worn out, you send them back to Worn Again Technologies, and they recycle them to make more anoraks. So that's great. One more. Grape leather. We get wine and grape juice from grapes, but you can also use the skins and seeds and stems to make another vegan alternative to leather. Okay. Okay, and this is a really important quote from William Lana, who runs Green Fibres in Totnes, with whom I had a very edifying conversation before this talk. And he's got this great quote in their brochure, actually. What we buy will be produced, and what we don't won't. And this is about consumer power, which we should not underestimate. Consumer boycotts of South African goods were a very significant factor in bringing down apartheid. So yeah, we can make a difference. I mean, if we just stop buying it, they won't make so much, and what we do buy, they will make more of. Okay. So a few sources. Now, obviously, I created this before I came here. And so these are just a tiny addition to all the wonderful artisans and people you've got here selling their wares, which are absolutely fantastic. These are just the ones I found, there is more. Green Fibres in Totnes is brilliant, 100% ethical, and William, who runs it, used to lecture in sustainable agriculture at Winchester University, so you know, he's ethical, he's not just on a bandwagon. Food furnishings in Cornwall, Fruki also in Cornwall, clothes, bed linen. Now, I met these people recently, Meme and Natural Colour. They use organic fabrics, but they're also doing something amazing. They're growing flowers from which to make natural dyes. They grow a couple of plants, I can't remember what they are, to make indigo dye, and they grow yellow and orange flowers to make their orange dyes. And I've seen their scarves and other clothes, they're really beautiful. And the great thing about them is because the dye is made from flowers, it can just go on the compost heap when it's exhausted. Another circular economy. Healthy house and many more that I don't know about yet. Now, bed is really important. We're spending 8 hours a night in there, hopefully. Mattress, duvets, pillows and sheets are really important. This is the best investment, I think, for your health, apart from eating organic and getting a water filter to get a safe mattress. From Abaca in Wales, and the Natural Mat, which make organic mattresses, and they also do bedding. Naturacare, safe, organic, menstrual pads, tampons, panty liners, wet lights, no perfume, no chlorines in their wet wipes and so on. All fully can you go back a bit? All fully biodegradable. Okay, thank you. So, I just need to say I've got no financial or any kind of connection with any of the companies that I've mentioned, but they're the ones I've had time to investigate and check out, and I believe they're sound, but we all need to do that kind of research. Okay, always look for the GOTS label, Global Organic Textile Standards. As the earlier speaker said, that has a seal of approval from the Soil Association. You can trust it. Okay, some more resources for you. Pesticide Action Network, Women's Environmental Network, amazing. They've been going since the 1980s. Very, very good resource for safe fabrics and safe everything else. Soil Association, Ethical Consumer is good as well, website magazine. They had a whole feature about safe fabrics in April, I think. Okay, now don't be overwhelmed by this, right? Don't try and change everything at once. Take it one step at a time, and prioritise your nightwear, your bedding, and I should say t-shirts and leggings if you wear leggings, because that's what's got maximum contact with your body. You know, change that first before you change what you're wearing over the top, as it were. With bedding, you're not just absorbing it through your skin. If it's toxic, you're absorbing it by inhalation for 8 hours a night as well. Okay, yeah, again, I just contacted him and he said, I'll give everybody a discount to the end of October, SFW for Sustainable Fashion Week 20. Not mattresses, because they take months to handmake, not gift vouchers. Everything else, you can get a 20% discount until the end of October. And I think it's well worth, if you haven't been buying organic cotton and safe sustainable fabrics up till now, that's the place to start. Okay, so my book, which I'll be signing for you later on, Staying Alive in Toxic Times, A Seasonal Guide to Lifelong Health, doesn't have much about fabric, although it does have quite a bit about bedding. And I wrote that because so many of my patients, when they got better, said to me, why doesn't my GP know all this stuff about what's poisoning us? And can you please write it down? So I have written it down. And it's about empowering us to know what's out there, what's making us ill, and what we can do both in our individual lives and to some extent in a campaigning sense to make ourselves safer and healthier. All right, and thanks to George, you can now contact me online and look at my website and all that sort of high-tech stuff. I'm going to take questions now, but first I'm going to answer the question that I know someone's going to ask, which is, but it's so expensive to buy organic cotton. It is. And, okay, when people say to me, it's so expensive to eat organic free-range chicken, I say, yeah, but if you're eating battery chicken, you've been eating it 5 times a week, get organic free-range chicken and just eat it once a week, because that's all you need. And I would say the same here, that, you know, if you buy 8 t-shirts a year, change to organic and just buy 2 or 3. So you won't be spending more. We need fewer clothes. We all know we need vastly fewer clothes in our wardrobe. And the other thing I would say, again, when people talk to me about food and not being able to afford organic, I say, well, in the 50s and 60s we spent 33% of our income on food. Now we're spending about 8%. So with food and with clothes, we need to re-prioritise, because you can't put a price on your health. And I've had somebody sit in a consultation with me and say, I can't afford to eat organic. By the way, can I reschedule next month's appointment because we're going to Barbados? Okay, lovely, have a great time, get all that vitamin D from the sun, but they can't. So we do have to prioritise, I think, and splash out on a safe mattress and a few safe items of clothing, pillows, pillowcase, duvet cover, because, you know, God forbid you get cancer, that costs you more because you become unable to work and earn money. So yeah, all I can say is it's expensive, but it's worth it. And also, why is it so expensive? Now, firstly, this is a campaigning issue. You write to your MP and you say, why are the government subsidising, you know, huge agri-chemical monocrop businesses that are making us sick? Why aren't they subsidising for people who grow organic cotton, people who grow organic food? Secondly, when you buy cheap, nasty, synthetic or non-organic cotton products, you're not paying for the whole of the item. You're not paying, for example, for the clean-up, for the runoff of all the pesticides they've used, which run off into the water table, and the water companies have to take some of that out, but we're paying the water companies to do that. Whereas with organic, you're paying for the whole item. So effectively, the non-organic is being subsidised. It's political, and there's no getting away from that.
Okay, should we take some questions of the room if you mind? Happy to take some questions.
Hiya, thank you. This was really interesting. So you mentioned the GOT certification, obviously. I was just wondering what your opinion was on Ecotex 100.
Ecotex 100.
Ecotex 100 is much, much better than nothing, but it's not quite as pure as the GOTS. Life is the art of the possible, isn't it? Well, we do what we can and what we can afford in the moment. But I think a lot of it is about buying far, far, far fewer clothes. I mean, it's brilliant that people are taking, you know, the polyester clothes and recycling them and turning curtains into clothes and clothes into bags. It's brilliant, but in the end, we want to stop it being produced at source. Questions or comments?
Are the clothes you're wearing now 100% organic?
No, but they're 15 and 20 years old respectively. As I said, I have learnt about all this incredibly recently, and I shall never again buy any item of clothing that isn't fully sustainable organic cotton or organic wool or hemp or linen. I have got some hemp jackets, but my wardrobe is very sustainable in the sense that I virtually never ever buy new clothes, purely because I'm bad at doing it. I don't like shopping, and you know. So the cords are 15 years old, the top is 20 years old and was a present, probably given to me by someone who thought, God, she just dresses so badly, someone's got to get her something. My daughter is studying fashion at Nottingham Trent University, and the joke in the family is that somebody had to sort her parents out. So, no, in all seriousness, now I've learnt about this. When I do, on very rare occasions, buy clothes, they will only be organic cotton. But yeah, 20 years old, 15 years old. And as somebody here said, the most sustainable item is the one that's already in your wardrobe. But, I haven't got that many clothes in my wardrobe, but probably still 3 or 4 times more than I need.